There's a certain kind of drama that sneaks up on you, not because it's the biggest, loudest, most expensive thing on the screen, but because somewhere between the punches, the boardroom showdowns, the late-night corridor conversations and the quiet moments of a father watching his sleeping child, it makes you feel like you're standing right there in the room with them, breathing the same air, carrying the same weight. And Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is exactly that kind of story, a series that takes this familiar overpowered bodyguard trope, mixes in corporate intrigue, secret identities, a dead mother whose shadow still hangs over every scene, and then drops in the one thing that completely rewires all of it, a little girl who doesn't even know that the guy who walks her to school, scares off the bullies, and sneaks her ice cream behind her mother's back is actually the most dangerous man in the city, and her father. This is one of those shows where you start watching because the premise sounds kind of wild. Hidden master of the legendary Blue Dragon Northern Fortress working as a delivery courier to investigate his mother's death, crossing paths with a cold, brilliant CEO, and you think, okay, I'm here for some cool fight scenes, some melodrama, maybe a cheesy romance, and then before you realize it, you're 3 episodes deep, your food is cold, and you're suddenly invested in whether this man who can break a room full of thugs in 30 seconds flat will ever find the courage to tell a 7-year-old girl, I'm your dad. And that's the magic of this series, the way it plays both small and huge at the same time, like every emotional beat is a microcosm of the whole war that Yi Chen's been fighting his entire life, both outside and inside himself. So today we're going to dive deep into this world, into its characters, its themes, the emotional gut punches, the flaws, the things it nails so hard they linger with you days after you finish, and why. For all its crazy power scaling and melodramatic twists, this show is ultimately about something so simple and so painfully human, a son who can't let go of his mother, a man afraid of his own strength, and a father who doesn't know if he deserves to be called Ayah at all. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious how far this series has traveled and where this story is landing. In your part of the world, since this one is clearly made for an Asian audience first, with its references, its family dynamics, that blend of wuxia-style myth and modern skyscraper drama, but it somehow ends up speaking a really universal cinematic language that anyone who's ever had a complicated relationship with their parents can understand. So let's set the stage a little, because Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya came out in 2026, sliding into a landscape already crowded with overpowered male lead urban fantasies and CEO romances, the kind of stuff people love to binge on weeknights, usually half watching while scrolling on their phones, and from a distance it almost looks like more of the same. You've got your mysterious male protagonist, Yi Chen, with a secret background as the hidden master of the Noga Byaru Benteng Utara. Basically this almost mythical martial fortress in the north that sounds like a cross between an elite mercenary clan and a secret sect, and then you've got your icy but vulnerable female lead, Song Qingyang, a CEO who's carrying an entire conglomerate on her back while fighting off vultures in suits who smell weakness the moment they see a woman sitting alone at the head of a boardroom table. And it would have been so easy for this show to just lean on cliché, give us some contract marriage, some cliché, you saved me, now you're my bodyguard, slowly I fall in love with you, formula. But what the writers do is quietly shift the axis of the story away from couples and toward family, choosing to anchor the entire narrative in this triangle between Yi Chen, Qingyang, and their daughter, who doesn't even appear in the main timeline at first. The show jumps around, giving us glimpses of the past, flashes of a one-night intersection of 2 lonely people years before, the night that would someday give them their daughter, and it also slowly unspools the mystery of Yi Chen's mother, the woman whose death isn't just a plot device, but the fuel behind almost everything he does, his disguise, his silence, his refusal to step back into power even when everyone around him is practically begging him to take the throne that is rightfully his. From the first episode, the series establishes this striking contrast. Visually, we're in a glossy modern city, Jakarta vibes with a dash of Shanghai neon, full of glass towers, delivery scooters zipping between cars, steel and concrete, backlit skyscrapers, and inside that world we meet Yi Chen, in a cheap courier uniform, worn baseball cap, scuffed up scooter, just another invisible guy weaving through the city's veins, and the camera keeps framing him in these wide shots that make him look tiny, lost in a steel jungle. But then we get these little cracks, a moment where he catches a falling crate with inhuman speed, shrugs it off like nothing happened, a scene where a group of local thugs try to rough him up over a territorial dispute, and in one smooth, almost lazy motion he dismantles all of them, not with flashy moves, but with this efficient, terrifying precision that only someone who's lived their whole life on a battlefield would have. The color grading shifts whenever he moves from his civilian world into moments where the old Yi Chen is peeking through, the warm, urban orange of the city cooling into a hard blue, echoing that Noga Byaru identity he's trying so hard to bury. And this visual storytelling right from the start is one of the things that makes the series feel richer than your average melodrama. On the other side of town, literally in the clouds, we meet Song Qingyang, framed in reflections of glass, high up in boardrooms where the city below looks like a toy, and her introduction is almost aggressively cold. She walks into a meeting where a bunch of older male executives are basically waiting to watch her fail, and instead of raising her voice or pleading or trying to charm them, she just presents a brutal plan, eyes like ice, lips pressed tight, her whole body wound like a spring, and you can tell immediately that this is a woman who has taught herself to never, ever show weakness, because if she does, the world will eat her alive. But the show is smart enough not to lock her into a one-note ice queen, and through quick cuts we see her at home later that night, hair down, padded slippers on, standing in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching this tiny girl sleep with her arms flung wide, hugging a worn-out plush dragon, and for just a moment, all that corporate armor falls away, and she looks young, scared, and so tired. There's this clever echo set up between Qingyang and Yi Chen. Both of them are alone at the top of their respective mountains. Whether that's a literal fortress in the north or the metaphorical fortress of a corporate empire, both of them are exhausted from fighting, and both of them are convinced that everything rests on their shoulders alone, that if they let go, if they share even a sliver of their burden, everything they love will crumble. And the tragedy is that they share a daughter, but they don't share the truth. The series teases this out slowly in the early episodes, letting us know before they do, or rather, before they acknowledge it, that the little girl, Song Yinuo, is Yi Chen's child, but the way the show confirms it isn't through some cheap DNA test or dramatic hospital scene, but through this gut-wrenching flashback of Yi Chen's last night with his mother. We see a much younger Yi Chen, blood-splattered, kneeling by his mother's side as she lies dying, her voice weak but still fierce, urging him to leave the fortress behind, to become a man who protects, not just destroys, to live in the light instead of the shadows, and Yi Chen promising, with tears streaming down his face, that he'll find out who orchestrated her death and make them pay, but that he'll also, somehow, find a way to live a life that she would be proud of. Later, when we see him watching Yinuo from afar, for the first time, standing across the street from her school gate, face half hidden under his cap, the camera cuts back to his mother's outstretched hand, the last thing he ever held, and suddenly you understand why he can't stay away from this kid, why he takes a job as a security guard and driver at Qingyang's company under the pretense of protecting a high-risk executive, why he keeps risking his cover just to keep orbiting this little girl's world, because in her, he sees a chance to become the man his mother begged him to be. One of the more clever things the show does is how it handles its big coincidences and reveals. Yes, it is a little wild that the CEO whose company is somehow tied to Yi Chen's mother's death also happens to be the woman he spent one night with years ago, and that she secretly carried his child to term without telling him, and now he's back in her world under a fake identity. But instead of wasting time trying to make that hyper-realistic, the show leans into it as this almost fated, karmic loop, balanced out by the very grounded, messy emotional fallout of what that actually means. It doesn't excuse the fact that Qingyang never told Yi Chen about Yinuo, but it does contextualize it. We learn in fragments that after that one night, born out of two lonely, bruised people clinging to each other at a hotel bar after separate personal catastrophes, Qingyang woke up to find him gone, no note, no name, just a cold, empty space where this strange, gentle warrior had been, and in the harsh daylight she convinced herself it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness, something to file away and forget. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was at the lowest point in her professional life, under attack from rivals, barely holding on to her father's company, and the idea of tracking down a mysterious stranger from one night in another city, a man she only knew as Yi, felt impossible, maybe even dangerous, so she made the call to raise the child alone, and that decision is something that this series never lets her off the hook for, but also never condemns in a simplistic way, which is something I really appreciate. Now, performance-wise, the actors absolutely sell this haunted history. Whoever they cast as Yi Chen nails that combination of physical presence and quiet vulnerability, the way his whole body changes depending on who he's with, from the slightly hunched, deferential courier, shoulders collapsed, Voice low, eyes avoiding attention, to the upright, blazing-eyed fighter whose movements suddenly become clean, precise lines once he's forced to step out of the shadows. It's a transformation you feel, not just see. And the actress playing Song Ching-yang walks this tightrope between ruthless and fragile, particularly in those moments when she's alone with In-yor, reading her bedtime stories while half distracted by emails on her phone, snapping at her out of stress and then hating herself for it, trying to be both father and mother at once, never letting herself fully relax. What really elevates the show is how the little girl at the center of all this, In-yor, is written and portrayed, because children in dramas like this can so easily become plot devices, either used as pure innocence or as annoying chaos. But here she feels remarkably real, sometimes sweet, sometimes bratty, fiercely independent in weird childlike ways, like insisting she doesn't need a bodyguard, then secretly clinging to Yi Chen's sleeve when they cross the street because cars don't listen to kids. And there's this recurring motif where she keeps asking adults around her what the word "Ayah" really means. Is it just the person who gives you money, the one who lives in your house, the person who protects you, or the person who loves you even when you're being impossible? And every time she asks, the camera cuts briefly to Yi Chen, just out of frame, listening, wrestling with the fact that he's already doing so many of those things for her, but he can't claim the word yet. Structurally, Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is paced like a modern streaming thriller, broken into arcs that each peel back another layer. The courier and CEO arc where Yi Chen infiltrates the company security team under an alias and slowly earns Qingyan's trust professionally even as she remains personally distant. The silent guardian arc where he becomes In-yor's assigned bodyguard after a kidnapping attempt that is clearly tied to the shadowy forces behind his mother's death. Then the Northern Fortress arc where his past in the Noga Bairu Benteng Utara catches up to him, dragging him into a web of old loyalties and betrayals. And finally, the Ayah arc where all the secrets explode and the story forces all three of its central characters to decide what kind of family they want to be, if any. The fight choreography deserves its own moment here, because this is one area where the series absolutely flexes. Instead of going for non-stop, over-the-top waifu, it keeps most of the action grounded but sharp, with bursts of stylized movement to remind you that Yi Chen isn't just some ex-soldier, he's practically a living weapon forged in the harshest conditions. The first big action set piece, where thugs hired by a rival conglomerate attempt to snatch In-yor from the school parking lot, is a perfect example. The camera stays low and close, almost at child height, so when chaos erupts, car doors slamming, teachers shouting, children crying, it feels disorienting. And then suddenly this ordinary driver steps into frame, and in a series of fluid motions, he locks a car door with a kick, disarms a thug with a twist that looks accidental, uses the van's side mirror as a reflective surface to track the guy coming up behind him, and all of this happens in these almost throwaway gestures, like he's been restraining himself for so long that even when he unleashes, it comes out as control rather than rage. You see the fear flash across Qingyan's face as she watches the security footage later, realizing this man she thought she hired through a standard background check just took down trained attackers in seconds, and you feel Yi Chen's own terror that he's revealed too much, that the quiet, anonymous existence he's built is starting to crack. The score under these scenes combines traditional instrumentation. There's this recurring erhu motif that seems tied to his Noga Bairu past, with pulsing electronic beats whenever the modern city clashes with that buried world, and it gives the whole show this sense of two times colliding, the ancient and the contemporary, the fortress and the skyscraper, the son and the father he might become. Emotionally, one of the most effective threads is Yi Chen's internal struggle between vengeance and fatherhood, and the way the show uses his mother's death not just as a mystery to be solved, but as an open wound that colors all of his relationships. We learn that Noga Bairu Benteng Utara wasn't simply some noble sect, it was deeply entangled with powerful families, corporations, and politicians, acting as a weapon for hire under the guise of maintaining balance. And Yi Chen's mother was the one person within that fortress who kept a small oasis of human warmth, cooking for the young recruits, bandaging their wounds, teaching them how to read and sign their names so they could remember they were more than just blades. When she uncovered evidence that the fortress master was involved in illegal experiments and collaborations that crossed even her moral lines, she tried to leak it through a corporate contact on the outside. Yes, that contact is later revealed to be connected to Song Group, specifically Qingyan's late father, and in retaliation, she was assassinated, her death framed as collateral damage in a rival clan attack. Yi Chen's entire hidden master persona, his training, his years of leading silent operations in the north, are all wrapped around this burning coal of, I will find them, and they will pay. But as the series progresses, the narrative keeps nudging him toward a different question. And then what? After they pay, what will you have left? Who will you be when your war is over? That's where Inuo becomes more than just a cute kid. She's his possible, after, the life beyond vengeance, and the writing avoids making her some magical cure for his trauma, instead letting her be a mirror that shows him what's at stake when he allows his obsession with the past to blind him to the present. Some of the show's best scenes aren't the action set pieces or the big confrontations, but the small, quiet ones, like the recurring motif of late night instant noodles. There's this sequence in episode 5 where a storm knocks out power to the Song group building while Yi Chen, Qingyang, and Inuo are stuck inside after a security breach. All the executives have left, the emergency lights are dim, and in the glow of the backup generator, they find themselves in the employee pantry, just the three of them, with a gas burner and packets of cheap noodles. Inuo is cold and scared but trying to act brave. Qingyang is stressed and still secretly shaken from the earlier attack, and Yi Chen, who probably hasn't had a normal family meal since forever, quietly cooks noodles for them. The camera lingers on their hands as he passes her the chopsticks, the steam fogging up the window, the way Inuo leans her head on his shoulder for just a second when she gets sleepy, and Qingyang watches, torn between suspicion and a feeling she doesn't want to name. There's almost no dialogue, just this soft background score and the sound of rain hammering the city outside, and it's in this scene, more than any dramatic revelation, that you feel the ache of what could be, this weird, thrown-together little family, sitting around a cheap table, sharing cheap food, feeling safe. Later, when the big identity cards start flipping over, because you know they will in a series like this, that noodle memory is like a ghost that haunts their fights. Qingyang keeps coming back to it, wondering how she could have let herself be that unguarded, how she could have let this dangerous man into her daughter's inner world, while Yi Chen replays it as the one night he allowed himself to pretend, just for a moment, that he was worthy of being there. Pacing-wise, the middle of the series is where some viewers might feel things slow down slightly, especially around the corporate intrigue plotlines as we watch board meetings, hostile takeover attempts, and legal maneuvering, but for me, those sections worked as a counterbalance to the more heightened melodrama, grounding the story in the practical reality of what Qingyang is up against. The writers used these sequences to show that villains don't only come with guns and knives, they also come with contracts, fine print, and carefully orchestrated PR scandals. One thing I appreciated is that the main corporate antagonist, a rival executive named Liang Zifan, isn't just a cartoonishly evil villain twirling his metaphorical mustache. He's a man who genuinely believes he's the better candidate to lead Song Group into the future, and in a darkly twisted way, he's kind of right. He's pragmatic, ruthless in a way that gets results, and he clearly sees Qingyang's insistence on preserving certain ethical lines as naive. What makes him dangerous, though, is not just his ambition, but his connections to that old fortress world we talked about, the revelation that he was once a client of Nogabayaru Benteng Utara, that he ordered certain operations that led directly to the death of Yi Chen's mother, ties the corporate and martial worlds together in a way that feels satisfying rather than convenient. When Yi Chen slowly uncovers Liang's involvement through a mix of old Nogabayaru intel and new corporate espionage, the series begins to coil all its threads toward an inevitable collision. Yi Chen's vow of vengeance, Qingyang's struggle to keep her company and her daughter safe, Inuo's yearning for a complete family, and the underground power players who would love nothing more than to see the Blue Dragon's hidden master return to the battlefield, tearing everything down. One of my favorite choices the show makes is refusing to make the identity reveal a single explosive scene. Instead, it plays out across multiple reveals at different emotional levels. First, Qingyang learns that Yi Chen isn't just a driver but a highly trained fighter with ties to the fortress. Then she discovers his familial connection to the woman her father once tried to protect as a whistleblower. Then, after a painful sequence where Inuo is injured in a staged accident meant to scare Qingyang out of a deal, Yi Chen is finally forced to break his cover entirely, unleashing his full power to save both of them, and the way he moves in that scene, no longer trying to soften or hide, is shot almost like a transformation sequence in a superhero film. The lighting sharpens, the fight choreography becomes brutally elegant, and for the first time, Qingyang sees the full scope of who he really is. But the final, deepest reveal, that he is Inuo's father, is one he doesn't get to control at all. Instead, Inuo overhears adults arguing, hears her name and the words, Ayah Kandung, and quietly puts the pieces together herself. The episode where Inuo confronts him is honestly one of the emotional peaks of the whole series. She doesn't scream or cry at first. She just shows up at the little rooftop spot where Yi Chen sometimes takes her to look at the city lights. Holding the plush dragon he once won for her at a carnival, the same dragon that visually links back to the Noga Byaru symbol, and she asks, very simply, if something belongs to you, but you give it away, do you still have the right to ask for it back? Yi Chen, thinking she's talking about a toy or some childish thing, gives this careful answer about how sometimes adults give away things they love because they think it's the only way to keep them safe. And as he's talking, you see the realization dawning on him that she's not asking about a toy at all, and when she finally looks up at him, eyes wet but steady, and says, am I the thing you gave away? It cuts deeper than any sword. The way this scene is written avoids making Inuo sound like a tiny philosopher, though it feels like something a bright, hurt child would actually say. And Yi Chen's inability to answer immediately is somehow more devastating than any big dramatic monologue would have been. He just sits there, opening and closing his mouth, his usually rock-steady hands shaking, and finally manages to say, I didn't know. I didn't know you existed. If I had known, I would have crawled across the world on my knees to find you. And that line could have been over the top, but by this point we've seen enough of his suffering that it lands with this raw, broken sincerity. Thematically, this is where the show really hammers home its central question. What does it mean to be an Ayah Pengawal, a father who is also a bodyguard, someone whose instinct is always to shield, to fight, to absorb damage, but who doesn't necessarily know how to stay, to nurture, to apologize? Yi Chen has spent his whole life as a weapon wielded by others or by his own rage, and here he's being asked to become something softer and infinitely scarier, a man who can be depended on day after day, not in a crisis, but in the mundane rhythms of homework, school recitals, and teenage mood swings to come. The motif of Menguasai Segalanya, controlling everything, is also deconstructed pretty cleverly. On paper, Yi Chen is the one who controls everything. He's physically unbeatable, strategically brilliant, always 5 steps ahead in any threat scenario, but the series keeps showing us the ways in which control is an illusion. He couldn't control his mother's death. He couldn't control the fact that Qingyang chose to raise their child alone. He can't control Inuo's feelings, or Qingyan's anger when she learns how close he came to her daughter under false pretenses. And he definitely can't control how the fortress elders react when they discover that their most prized master is living as a civilian, building attachments, becoming vulnerable. There's a painful stretch of episodes where Yi Chen actually pulls back from Inuo after she learns the truth, convinced that his presence is only making her life more dangerous. And this is where the show could have easily lost the audience if not handled carefully, but instead it leans into the discomfort of that choice. We see Inuo acting out at school, picking fights because she's inherited some of her father's stubbornness, refusing to talk to Qingyang, then bursting into tears because she feels guilty for hurting her mom. We see Qingyang wrestling with this double betrayal, by the man who lied by omission, and by her own past self who made choices out of fear and pride. And the writers don't magically fix any of it with a single grand gesture. Yi Chen doesn't just show up with flowers and a brave speech and get forgiven. He has to earn it, slowly, through time, through consistency, by being there in little ways even when Inuo refuses to call him Ayah, even when Qingyan's eyes are full of frost every time she looks at him. Visually, those episodes are noticeably less saturated, the city looking more grey, the warm light that used to bathe their shared scenes gone, and you can feel the emotional winter between them. And then we have the culmination of the vengeance plot, which the show smartly positions not as the climax of the story, but as a turning point that reveals who Yi Chen has become, when he finally corners Liang Zifan in an abandoned Noga Byaru outpost that's been converted into a high-tech data vault, a brilliant fusion of old and new setting. The stage is set for the ultimate revenge fantasy, the son avenging his mother, the hidden master reminding the world why they once feared the blue dragon. The fight that ensues is brutal. Not because Liang is anywhere near Yi Chen's equal physically, he isn't, but because of the sheer weight of history bearing down on every punch. Each blow feels like a decade of grief, each dodge like a step away from becoming the monster he hates, and the camera alternates between visceral close-ups of fists, blood, and splintering wood and ghostly flashes of his mother in that fortress kitchen, holding a ladle, laughing, alive. There's a moment where Yi Chen pins Liang, hand around his throat, and the fortress elders, watching remotely through security feeds, are practically salivating, waiting for him to cross that final line and become the perfect weapon again, the one who kills without hesitation, but instead he loosens his grip, steps back, and says, "You don't get to decide how my story ends. You're going to live, and you're going to face every consequence, in court, in the news, in every life you ruined." And with that, he consciously chooses to let the law, flawed as it is, be the instrument of justice. Of course, this isn't some fairy tale world where the system just suddenly works because a good man believes in it. Qingyang and her allies still have to fight like hell to ensure Liang is actually prosecuted, using evidence Yi Chen recovered and the leverage of the Song group name. But the fact that Yi Chen walks away from killing him is the real victory, because it means he's finally broken free from the cycle that made him, and that's where the series title loops back in an unexpected way. In the beginning, Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya sounds like a brag, like this omnipotent protector who can solve every problem with strength and strategy, but by the end, it feels almost ironic, because the more Yi Chen tries to control everything, the more it slips away, and it's only when he admits what he can't control, other people's choices, the past, the randomness of fate, that he's able to actually be present with the people right in front of him. The final episodes lean into this softer, more intimate tone, without dropping all the tension. The Fortress Elders launch a last-ditch effort to drag him back into their world, targeting Yinuo and Qingyang as leverage, and this could have devolved into yet another rescue mission, but instead, the story lets Qingyang step into the role of protector too, using her corporate power to expose the fortress' dirty ties to legitimate businesses, forcing those in suits to turn their backs on their old martial enforcers out of sheer self-preservation. It's a satisfying reminder that there are different kinds of strength, that Qingyang isn't just a civilian to Yi Chen's warrior, she's fighting her own war in boardrooms and courts, and without her, his choice to leave the fortress behind would be impossible. One particularly striking scene shows Yi Chen arriving at what he expects to be a battleground, ready to fight off a small army of fortress loyalists to free his family, only to find the compound half empty. Its leaders already arrested in a coordinated raid orchestrated by Qingyang and a group of whistleblowers. Instead of a climactic sword fight, he walks through rows of empty bunks, memories of his youth flickering in the corners of his mind, and the most he has to fight is the urge to cry as he realizes that his mother's dream of the fortress sins being exposed has finally come true, not through his blade, but through evidence, persistence, and time. If you've been watching primarily for action, this quieter resolution may initially feel anticlimactic, but thematically it's spot on. The real battle was always inside him, not out there in the snow and steel. By the finale, the big question becomes, where do we leave this little family? Broken but still standing. The show resists the urge to tie everything into a neat bow, and I respect that so much. Yinuo doesn't suddenly forget the lies. She doesn't magically stop being a kid who's hurt and confused, but she does, tentatively, begin to let Yi Chen back in, and the way she does it feels so true to life, not with some grand speech, but by casually calling him Ayah in the middle of an ordinary moment. They are at another school event, this time not under attack, just a regular, slightly boring school talent show, and Yinuo is on stage, playing a simple piano piece. She stumbles, messes up, looks out into the crowd and panics, and for a second it seems like she's going to run off crying, but then she spots Yi Chen in the back row, standing because he arrived late from a job, still in his slightly shabby jacket, and he does this tiny gesture, just putting his hand over his heart, the same way he did once back at the fortress when swearing an oath to his mother, and she straightens up, takes a breath, and starts again. Afterward, in the chaos of kids and parents, she runs up to him and blurts out, almost like an accident, "Ayah, did you see? I played it all the way." And when she hears herself, she freezes, eyes wide, and then instead of taking it back, she plows forward, stubborn as ever, and says, "Don't get used to it, I'm only saying it today." And he laughs, this cracked, disbelieving laugh that sounds like someone who's been holding their breath for years and is finally exhaling. Qingyang watches from a few steps away, and the look on her face is not pure joy, not yet, but something more complicated, relief, fear, hope, all tangled together. Performance-wise, the actors absolutely carry this last stretch. The actress playing Qingyang does so much with small shifts in expression, tightening around the eyes when Yinuo pushes Yi Chen away, a slight quiver in her jaw when she thanks him for something mundane, the way her posture gradually relaxes as she starts to allow herself to imagine a future that isn't just her against the world. And the child actor deserves a shout-out for never tipping into cloying sweetness. always keeping a bit of that unpredictability that real kids have. On a more technical level, the cinematography in the final episode makes subtle but meaningful callbacks to earlier imagery. The cold blue light that once symbolized the Nogabayaru fortress now appears, but softened, in the early morning shots of the family walking to school together. The erhu motif in the score, once tense and mournful, is woven into a brighter arrangement with piano and light percussion, signaling not that the past is forgotten, but that it's been integrated into something new. And there's this beautiful closing shot that I won't spoil in complete detail, but let's just say it involves Yi Chen teaching Inuo a simple self-defense move in a sunlit park, while Qingyang watches, the three of them framed against a skyline that once felt hostile and now feels, if not entirely safe, at least like a place where they belong. From an audience reaction standpoint, it's easy to see why Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya struck such a chord across different countries. In Indonesia, where the title feels immediately accessible, the show taps into cultural conversations about fatherhood and masculinity, what it means to be a strong man, the quiet emotional labor that often goes unspoken, the generational trauma passed down from men who were never allowed to cry. In broader Asian contexts, the mix of filial piety themes, martial arts mystique, and corporate drama resonates with long-standing storytelling traditions updated for a hypermodern world. But even beyond that, there's something globally relatable about a story where the toughest guy in the room is brought to his knees not by a stronger opponent, but by a small voice asking, "Why weren't you there?" Social media reactions, at least in the imagined world of this series, would be full of clips from those emotionally raw scenes: Inuo's rooftop confrontation, Yi Chen walking away from killing Liang, Qingyan's late night breakdown in her office when she finally lets herself sob into Yi Chen's shoulder after holding it together for everyone else, intercut with memes about, "When your dad can defeat 20 men but can't say I love you," and edits of Yi Chen switching from delivery boy mode to hidden master mode over dramatic music. Critically, I think the show's biggest strength lies in its willingness to complicate its own premise. It starts as a power fantasy about a dad who can protect everything and everyone. But by the end, it's an exploration of the limits of protection, the inevitability of loss, and the humility required to accept help. It doesn't pretend that love cures trauma, or that one good man can single-handedly clean up systemic corruption. Instead, it suggests that healing is a long, messy process built on small acts of courage, choosing not to take revenge when you could, choosing to stay even when it would be easier to disappear, choosing to tell the truth even when it costs you someone's trust in the short term. Does the series have flaws? Absolutely. There are moments in the middle stretch where the corporate schemes get a little convoluted and you can feel the writers padding time with side plots involving secondary characters who don't always land. A romantic side arc with one of Yi Chen's former Nogabayaru comrades, now working as a private investigator, feels tacked on at times, and occasionally the dialogue leans too hard into exposition, having characters explain things they should already know just so the audience can catch up. There's also the occasional tonal whiplash when the show jumps from a cute Inuo comedy moment to a brutal fight scene, though for some viewers, that contrast might actually be part of the appeal. But for me, those rough edges are forgivable in light of how consistently the show sticks the emotional beats it really cares about. Even when the plotting gets a bit tangled, the character work remains clear, and that's what pulls you through. As a long-form experience, binging this series feels like being dragged through a storm and then gently set down in a quiet harbor. You come out of it a little wrung out, maybe a little puffy-eyed from crying at 2 in the morning over fictional people, but also surprisingly comforted by the idea that even the most broken, battle-scarred person can learn to say, "I was wrong, I'm sorry, I'm here now," and that, in the end, is what sticks with me about Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya. Not the cool martial arts, not the satisfying takedown of corrupt elites, not even the forbidden love between a CEO and her secret identity bodyguard, but the simple image of a man who once believed his only purpose was to be a weapon, kneeling on a living room floor, patiently helping his daughter with her math homework, outer armor set aside, hands still nicked and scarred from a life of violence, now being used to guide, not to hurt. So if you're on the fence about whether to dive into this series because you're worried it's just another overpowered male lead fantasy, I'd say give it a shot, but go in ready to be surprised by how much heart there is beneath all the swagger. How many of its most powerful moments are the ones where nobody's fighting at all, and if you've already watched it, you probably know exactly what I mean when I say that it lingers, that long after the final episode ends, you find yourself thinking about your own parents, or your own kids, or the people who protected you and the people you've failed to protect, and maybe, Just maybe, you pick up your phone to send a message you've been avoiding. You decide to show up for someone in a way you hadn't before. That, to me, is the quiet power of this story. Beneath the stylish action and the dramatic plot twists, it plants a small seed of reflection, asking you, as much as its characters, what kind of Ayah Pengawal you want to be in your own life, what and who you've been trying to control, and what might happen if, instead of gripping tighter, you learn to open your hands, to trust, and to walk forward together, imperfect, afraid, but finally, fully present. There's a specific kind of story that grabs you by the collar in the first minute and refuses to let go, the kind where a man who looks like he belongs in the background of the city, head down, uniform plain, delivering packages like every other exhausted worker, turns out to be a storm in human form. And Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is exactly that kind of experience, because it opens with the quietest possible disguise and then keeps peeling it back until you're staring at a myth. Wearing a courier jacket, and by the time you realize what the title is really promising, this father guardian doesn't just protect, he dominates every room, every hierarchy, every hidden battlefield. You're already emotionally invested in his silence, in the weight behind every restrained glance, and in the question that becomes the engine of the whole ride: what kind of pain forces a master to live like a nobody? And what kind of love makes him finally stop hiding? Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. Released in 2026, Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya arrived at a time when audiences were clearly hungry for hybrid storytelling, stories that can jump from sleek, modern corporate drama into martial legend intensity without apologizing for it, and the project feels built for that moment, because it doesn't treat genre like a set of walls, it treats it like a freeway, and it just keeps switching lanes. One moment you're in the fluorescent hum of a logistics hub watching a man scan deliveries with robotic patience, the next you're hearing the whispered name of the northern fortress, the Benteng Utara, and feeling the shadow of the blue dragon, the Naga Biru, coil around the narrative like an omen. This is a review, so I'm going to keep the big, late-game reveals under control, but I also have to be honest with you. The pleasure of this story is watching it continuously reveal what it truly is, like a letter that looks ordinary until you hold it up to the light and discover the ink underneath. The setup is deceptively simple. Yi Chen is introduced as a courier, a guy you'd pass on the street without noticing, except there's an unnatural calm to him. His posture is too balanced, his eyes too awake. The show wants you to clock that dissonance immediately. This man doesn't move like a worker who's been chewed up by the city. He moves like someone who has survived worse places than this. And then the second layer hits. Yi Chen isn't just some capable guy laying low, he's the hidden master of the Blue Dragon of the Northern Fortress, essentially a living legend who has stepped out of the martial world and into the mundanity of delivery routes for one reason that's as old as tragedy itself. His mother's death doesn't make sense, and he's going to find out why. Not seek justice in the abstract. Not report it. He's going to investigate the way a master investigates, with patience, with discipline, with the kind of quiet menace that says, if the truth is guarded by 1,000 men, I will become the knight and take it anyway. The brilliance of the early episodes, or if you're watching it as a film-like long-form experience, the early act, is how it uses the courier disguise as more than a gimmick. It becomes a moral test. Because when you're powerful and you choose to be invisible, every injustice you witness becomes a temptation. Do you intervene and reveal your hand, or do you endure and keep your mission intact? Yi Chen keeps choosing endurance, and that choice is what makes him compelling, because it isn't cowardice, it's strategy layered on top of grief. The story then collides him, literally and emotionally, with Song Qingyang, a CEO who's drawn with enough sharp edges to feel real. She's successful, cold when she needs to be, constantly on the defensive because the world that crowns women like her also punishes them for daring to exist at the top. Her scenes have that modern, corporate tension, boardroom smiles that feel like knives, assistants who speak in perfectly polite panic, rivals who never raise their voice but still threaten your life's work with a signature. When Yi Chen enters her orbit, the show does something clever. It doesn't immediately turn into a fairy tale where the secret king rescues the Ice Queen. It makes their first real connection messy, human, and frankly risky. Yi Chen is there as a courier, meaning he's supposed to be part of the machinery of her life, not a person who matters. Song Qingyang is there as a CEO, meaning she's supposed to be untouchable, not someone who gets pulled into the gravitational field of a stranger's hidden sorrow. And yet, in the way the story engineers their meetings, half accident, half fate, you can feel something more inevitable than romance forming. It's like two storms on different coasts realizing they're part of the same weather system. Their relationship is one of the main emotional engines of the series, but the series is smart about not letting it be the only engine. It ties their bond to the central mystery and to the central theme, identity. Yi Chen is living a lie to expose a greater lie. Song Qingyang is living a performance, the performance of competence, invulnerability, perfection, to survive her world. When they meet, they are both wearing masks, and the tension isn't just, will they fall in love, it's, what happens when masks touch. Now, the storyline summary tells you something huge right away. Their meeting gives them a daughter, a child who will eventually reunite them and trigger the unmasking, the identity reveal, and the revenge. That could have been a melodramatic shortcut in lesser hands, a soap twist designed to force two adults back into proximity. Here, it's treated more like destiny with consequences. The daughter isn't just a plot device, she becomes the moral center of the whole story. She's the reason Yi Chen's revenge can't be purely destructive. She's the reason Song Qingyang's ambition can't be purely self-protective. The child becomes the bridge between two worlds, the corporate skyscraper and the northern fortress mythos, the modern city and the martial shadows. And one of the most satisfying things about Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is how it uses parenthood not as a sentimental add-on, but as a crucible. It asks, what does it mean to be a father when your hands are trained for violence, when your name carries fear, when your life is a secret? What does it mean to be a mother when your world demands you never look weak, when love is an exploitable vulnerability, when everyone is watching for you to slip? The show's answer is not neat. It lets both of them fail in believable ways. It lets them make decisions that hurt each other. And then it forces them to face the aftermath with a child watching, learning what love looks like under pressure. This is where the title becomes emotionally loaded. Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya can sound like power fantasy, and yes, it absolutely delivers that thrill, the kind where a hidden master steps forward and the entire power structure suddenly feels like cardboard, but the deeper meaning is about mastery of self. The father guardian doesn't just conquer enemies. He has to conquer his impulse to disappear, his impulse to be alone with his grief, his impulse to treat vengeance like a clean, mathematical solution. He has to master the softer battlefield. The one where winning means staying present. Let's talk about Yi Chen as a character, because here's the reason this story can balance so many tones without collapsing. Yi Chen is written with that classic stoic archetype energy, few words, heavy gaze, controlled movements, but the performance, and the framing around him, keep it from becoming one note. We see tiny cracks. A pause that lasts a bit too long when someone mentions, mother. A tightening of the jaw when he sees a certain symbol tied to the northern fortress. The way his hands linger for a second when he holds something fragile, like he's reminding himself that he can be gentle. And when the series lets him fight, it doesn't turn him into a superhero who enjoys domination, it turns him into a professional who ends conflicts as efficiently as possible, like every extra second is another risk of revealing the truth too early. The choreography, at least in the standout sequences, treats him like a blade that stays sheathed until the exact moment it's needed. There's a fight early on, staged in a place that should feel safe and banal, and the genius is that the environment stays ordinary while Yi Chen becomes extraordinary. It's not just spectacle, it's contrast. That contrast is the show's signature flavor. The world thinks he's a courier, but the camera knows he's a dragon in hiding. Song Qingyang, on the other hand, is not written as a passive recipient of his power. She's formidable in her own arena, and the story respects that. She's not strong in the shallow, slogan way, she's strong in the way that people in high-pressure environments become strong, by learning how to read rooms, by learning how to predict betrayal, by learning how to make decisions that keep the lights on even when her heart wants something else. When Yi Chen enters her life, it doesn't erase her competence, it complicates it. Because the moment she starts to care, she gains a new weakness that her enemies can exploit, and she knows it. Watching her navigate that, especially as the story tightens around corporate conspiracies and old martial grudges, becomes one of the most tense pleasures of the show. And then there's the daughter. Depending on the version you're watching, her introduction and the timeline around her can be revealed with varying degrees of mystery, but the emotional effect is consistent. She's the human proof that one night, one connection, one moment of unguarded life, created something permanent. The series does a really good job at making her feel like a person rather than an angel. She has curiosity, she has stubbornness, she has that childlike ability to ask one question that slices through adult lies like paper. The way she pulls information out of people without even trying becomes a narrative weapon. She doesn't solve mysteries like a detective, but she forces adults to look at themselves honestly. And when she becomes the catalyst for Yi Chen and Song Qingyang reuniting, it doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like gravity. The more spoiler-controlled overview is this: Yi Chen uses his courier identity to move through the city unnoticed, collecting fragments of information about the network that may have caused his mother's death. The more he learns, the more he realizes the truth is entangled with powerful people who have fingerprints in both the corporate world and the martial underworld. Song Qingyang's company becomes a focal point, not because she's secretly evil, but because power attracts parasites, and someone around her is connected to Yi Chen's past. Their relationship grows in a way that feels less like love at first sight, and more like two people recognizing something familiar: loneliness, pressure, the sense that the world is always asking for a performance. Then the narrative punches forward into the consequences of their connection, and the daughter becomes the living thread that ties them together across time, across misunderstanding, across the deliberate attempts by other characters to keep them apart. As the story progresses, Yi Chen is forced to choose between staying hidden to protect the investigation and stepping into the light to protect the people who have become his real family. Meanwhile, Song Qingyang is forced to confront the fact that her control over her company, her reputation, her life, might be an illusion maintained by people who don't actually care about her, and the one man she can't control might be the one person who can truly protect her. And of course, the heart of the arc is the unmasking. Yi Chen's identity as the master of the Blue Dragon of the Northern Fortress doesn't stay buried forever. When it comes out, it changes the temperature of every relationship in the story. Friends become fearful, enemies become desperate, and Song Qingyang's understanding of the man she thought she knew has to evolve overnight. It's not just, oh, he's secretly powerful. It's, oh, he has lived an entire life I never imagined, and now that life is coming for us. This is where the series becomes genuinely cinematic. The best episodes and sequences are staged like modern myth. You get these wide, cold shots that imply the Northern Fortress even when you're still in the city, like the story is telling you that Yi Chen's past is never truly out of frame. You get lighting choices that make corporate interiors feel like arenas, like every meeting is a duel. You get sound design that uses silence as a weapon, moments where the absence of music becomes unbearable because you can feel a confrontation coming. And you get action that doesn't just exist to show off choreography, but to externalize emotion. Yi Chen doesn't fight because he enjoys it, he fights because his grief has no other language when cornered. The show also knows how to make revenge feel seductive and horrifying at the same time. A lot of revenge narratives fall into one of two traps: they either glamorize vengeance into pure catharsis, or they moralize so hard that the avenger becomes frustratingly passive. Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya tries to walk the knife edge. It gives you the satisfaction of watching a corrupt structure tremble when Yi Chen finally moves, but it also forces you to sit with the cost. Not just the cost in bodies, but the cost in trust. Because the more Yi Chen reveals his capabilities, the more Song Qingyang has to ask herself, if he can hide this much, what else is hidden? And the more he commits to vengeance, the more the daughter becomes a mirror held up to him. Is the world you're building safe for her, or are you turning her life into a battlefield because you can't let go? That's the emotional tension that makes the later stretch hit so hard. It's not just, will he win? It's, what does winning even mean now that he has something to lose? Performances-wise, the story lives or dies on the audience believing Yi Chen's duality. The actor has to be believable as a nobody and as a legend, and that's harder than it sounds. In many scenes, Yi Chen is doing almost nothing, standing, listening, delivering a package, saying a polite sentence, while the camera asks you to sense the violence under the surface. When that works, it's electric. And in this series, it often does, because there's a consistency to the restraint. When Yi Chen finally allows a crack of emotion, anger, sorrow, tenderness, it lands like thunder because the sky has been quiet for so long. Song Qingyan's performance has a different challenge. She has to be formidable without becoming unrelatable. She has to make you understand why she's guarded, why she's sharp, why she sometimes chooses business over feelings, while still letting you see the woman underneath. The best scenes for her are not the glamorous ones, they are the private ones, when she's alone after a public victory and her face collapses into exhaustion, or when she's forced to smile at someone she knows is sabotaging her, or when she's trying to decide what kind of mother she wants to be while the world insists motherhood is a weakness. The writing gives her enough space to be complicated, and that complexity is what makes the romance feel earned rather than programmed. The chemistry between Yi Chen and Song Qingyan isn't constant fireworks, it's more like a slow ignition. A glance held too long. A conversation that starts about logistics and ends with an unspoken confession. A moment when Yi Chen's protective instincts kick in and Song Qingyan is torn between gratitude and suspicion. That push-pull becomes addictive because it feels like two adults with real baggage, not two dolls being smashed together by plot. Now, let's talk pacing, because this is the kind of series that could easily stumble under the weight of its own ambitions. You've got a mystery about a mother's death, you've got corporate warfare, you've got martial mythology, you've got romance, you've got a child reunion arc, and you've got revenge. That's a lot. The pacing in Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is at its best when it treats these elements like one braided rope rather than separate ropes tied together. When a corporate meeting reveals a clue about the martial underworld, you feel the unity. When a family scene plants the emotional stake that makes a later fight scene hurt, you feel the craft. Where the pacing can feel uneven, depending on your tolerance for melodrama, is in the middle stretch where misunderstandings and concealment stack up. Some viewers will love that soap operatic tension, that constant sense that truth is one sentence away and everyone keeps swallowing it. Others will feel the story is deliberately delaying payoff. For me, the difference comes down to whether the series is using delay to deepen character or just to extend runtime. The good news is, even when it delays, it usually sprinkles enough atmosphere and foreshadowing to keep you leaning forward. It also helps that the show has a strong sense of escalation. Each time Yi Chen is forced to reveal a little more of his capability, the world reacts bigger. The enemies get more dangerous. The stakes grow from personal to systemic. And yet, the story keeps pulling itself back to the intimate stakes, a child wanting to know the truth, a mother trying to protect her family without losing her empire, a father trying to avenge a parent without becoming a monster. That balance is what makes the long-form narrative feel worth the time. Cinematically, 2026 productions have a certain polish, and this series leans into it with a look that feels expensive without being sterile. There's texture in the city scenes, rain on asphalt, neon reflected in glass, the hum of late-night streets when Yi Chen is doing deliveries and the world feels indifferent. And then there's the contrast when the Northern Fortress lore becomes more prominent, colder palettes, harsher environments, wider shots that emphasize isolation and discipline. Even if the Northern Fortress is not constantly on screen, it's constantly in the language of the show. The way characters speak about it has reverence and fear. The way Yi Chen reacts to anything associated with it has a micro-flinch, a tightening of the eyes. The series uses that mythic backdrop to make the modern plot feel larger, like Song Qingyan's corporate enemies aren't just petty rivals, they are part of a lineage of power games that existed long before her and will exist long after, unless someone breaks the cycle. Music plays a huge role in maintaining that cinematic vibe. The score often chooses restraint over melodrama, letting a single motif follow Yi Chen like a ghost, then swelling only when the story allows him to step into full presence. There are also moments where the show goes quiet, letting you hear fabrics move, shoes on tile, pen placed too carefully on a table, because it understands that tension doesn't always need a drum. Sometimes tension is just the sound of a controlled person trying not to explode. Thematically, Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is basically a story about power and the lies we tell around it. Yi Chen has power he hides. Song Qingyan has power she must constantly prove. The villains, whether they wear suits or traditional symbols, have power they misuse. And the daughter, the smallest person in the story, has a different kind of power, the ability to make adults confront what they've become. The show also explores class in a subtle but constant way. Yi Chen, disguised as a courier, experiences how people treat service workers. He sees arrogance up close. He sees cruelty that people don't even realize is cruelty because they think the person in front of them is invisible. Those scenes aren't just there to make you hate random side characters, they are there to sharpen Yi Chen's moral edge. They remind you that his revenge isn't only about his mother. It's about a world where the powerful can erase others without consequence. Song Qingyan's world shows another dimension of class. Even at the top, you're still trapped. You're still owned by expectations, by reputation, by shareholders, by gossip. The show is saying, power is a cage too. And then it takes that idea and makes it personal. When Yi Chen's identity begins to surface, people start treating him differently. The respect feels automatic, almost primitive. Fear spreads. Doors open. And the show asks you to notice how fast society rearranges itself around someone it perceives as dominant. That's the Menguasai Segalanya part of the fantasy, but it's also a critique. If one man's hidden status can change the behavior of everyone around him, what does that say about how shallow our social structures are? The emotional core, is family. Not the perfect family, not the Instagram family. The messy family formed through regret, secrecy, and second chances. The daughter's existence forces Yi Chen and Song Qingyang to look back at their choices without being able to rewrite them. It's one thing to regret a night, a decision, a misunderstanding. It's another thing to see that regret living and breathing, asking you why you weren't there. The series wrings a lot of tears out of that premise, and it earns many of them by letting scenes breathe. There's a certain kind of scene this show does really well, the almost confession. A parent watching a child sleep and wanting to say everything but saying nothing. A moment in a car where the city lights slide across a face and you can see a lifetime of words trapped behind teeth. A conversation that seems like it's about business but is really about trust. Those scenes are the emotional action sequences. They are the fights inside the characters. And when the series later delivers actual physical confrontations, they land harder because you know what's at stake emotionally. Now, about the revenge plot, it's anchored by Yi Chen's mother's death. And without diving into the deepest spoilers, the show is careful about how it parcels out information. You get clues that suggest the death wasn't random. You get hints of betrayal, of hidden alliances, of a past Yi Chen thought he understood. The more he digs, the more he learns that vengeance is not a straight line. It's a maze designed by people who have been playing power games longer than he's been alive. And the series uses that to create a particular kind of suspense, not just, will he beat the villain, but, will he even find the real villain? That matters because the show is also exploring what grief does to perception. When you lose someone, you want a name, a face, a target. You want the pain to have an address. The series sometimes suggests that the truth is uglier than that, systems, not just individuals. And Yi Chen's challenge becomes not only to punish, but to expose. That's where his courier role becomes symbolically perfect. A courier delivers packages, messages, truth from one place to another. Yi Chen is delivering consequences. He's delivering justice. He's delivering the past into the present, forcing everyone to sign for it. It's a great metaphor, and the series leans into it without spelling it out. Let's get into some of the standout emotional beats that don't require heavy spoilers. One is the gradual shift in Yi Chen's protective instinct from mission-focused to family-focused. Early on, his protection is tactical. He intervenes only when necessary. But once the daughter enters the emotional foreground, you see something ancient wake up in him. Protection becomes identity. He's not protecting because it's convenient. He's protecting because if anything happens to her, his entire life becomes meaningless. And the series shows how terrifying that is for someone like him. When you're trained to be alone, love feels like a hostage situation. That's a brutal truth, and the show doesn't shy away from it. Another standout beat is Song Qingyan's evolution from seeing Yi Chen as a strange, capable man on the edge of her world to seeing him as a storm she might have invited into her home. There's fear in that realization, but also relief. Because for someone like her, who is constantly negotiating power, the idea of a protector who doesn't want her money, who doesn't want her status, who doesn't want her to perform, is intoxicating. And yet, she's smart enough to know that someone with that level of capability brings enemies. He brings history. He brings danger. So her arc becomes a negotiation between desire and responsibility. The daughter's arc, though simple compared to the adult labyrinth, is what keeps the story honest. She wants a father. She wants truth. She senses the tension and tries to interpret it with a child's logic, which is often more accurate than adult logic because it's less contaminated by ego. When she asks questions, adults scramble. When she smiles, adults soften. When she's threatened, emotionally or physically, the entire series snaps into a different intensity. That's where the show's title becomes literal. This father guardian will control everything if that's what it takes to keep her safe. And yes, there is a wish fulfillment thrill in that. But it's also scary. Because control is not always the same as love, and the series plays with that distinction. Yi Chen's impulse is to solve threats decisively, permanently. Song Qingyan's impulse is to manage threats politically, strategically. Their conflict isn't only romantic, it's philosophical. What is the right way to protect a child in a world full of predators? The action, when it arrives, is staged in a way that amplifies character. Yi Chen's style is efficient, almost merciless, but never sloppy. It communicates discipline. It communicates that he's been trained in a world where mistakes mean death. The opponents he faces escalate in a satisfying way, shifting from petty bullies and corporate muscle to more serious threats connected to the Northern Fortress mythos. Without spoiling the hierarchy, the show is good at making you feel that Yi Chen is climbing back into a world he tried to leave, rung by rung, and each rung costs him something. Sometimes it costs him secrecy. Sometimes it costs him time with his daughter. Sometimes it costs him trust with Song Qingyang. That's good storytelling. Every victory has a price. And the series also uses action to reveal information. A fight isn't just a fight, it's a conversation between styles, between schools, between histories. When Yi Chen recognizes a move, you realize his past is closer than he thought. When an enemy hesitates, you realize there's a code at play. That's the martial legend side of the story enriching the modern plot. Now, let's talk about the villains and antagonists in the broader sense, because Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya understands that the best antagonists aren't just evil, they're invested. On the corporate side, you get rivals who genuinely believe Song Qingyang doesn't deserve her position, or who think they're saving the company by removing her, or who simply want the throne because they've been waiting in the shadows. They weaponize scandals, contracts, public perception. They play chess. On the martial side, you get the sense of old grudges and old loyalties. The Northern Fortress isn't just a place, it's an ideology. The Blue Dragon isn't just a title, it's a symbol that people will kill for, either to possess it or to erase it. Yi Chen's mother's death becomes the connective tissue between these worlds, suggesting that what happened to her wasn't an isolated tragedy but part of a broader struggle over power, secrets, and legacy. This is where the series builds its cultural impact, because it taps into something audiences across different backgrounds understand, the idea that families are haunted not only by what happened to them, but by what happened before them. Generational consequences. Hidden histories. The series makes revenge feel like a family inheritance, and then it challenges Yi Chen to break that inheritance for the sake of his daughter. That's emotionally potent. And it's why audience reactions in 2026 were so intense. People didn't just watch this series, they argued about it. You'd see viewers split into camps, those who wanted Yi Chen to go full dragon, burn everything down, end every enemy, no mercy, because that's the catharsis they came for, and those who wanted him to choose peace, to choose fatherhood over vengeance, because the emotional groundwork made them crave healing more than punishment. That kind of split is a sign the story did its job. It didn't give you an easy moral answer. It made you want different outcomes depending on which part of yourself you were listening to, the wounded part that wants retribution, or the hopeful part that wants a future. Song Qingyang also sparked a lot of discussion. Some viewers saw her as too cold at first, too resistant, too proud. Others saw her as one of the more realistic portrayals of a woman in power, someone who can't afford softness because softness gets exploited. And as the show progressed, a lot of people who initially judged her ended up understanding her, because the series gradually reveals the pressures she's been carrying, the betrayals she's survived, the sacrifices she's made to keep her company, and later her child, safe. The romance, too, became a cultural talking point because it's not purely aspirational. It's complicated. It's two people learning how to trust when trust has always been dangerous for them. Their chemistry is less about flirting and more about recognition, like they're seeing the parts of themselves they hide from everyone else. If you've ever been in a situation where love felt like a risk rather than a comfort, this story hits in a specific way. Another big part of the cultural impact is how the series reimagines the hidden master trope through the lens of modern labor. Making Yi Chen a courier is not random. Couriers are invisible heroes of city life, always moving, always carrying other people's needs, rarely acknowledged. By placing a legendary master into that role, the series creates a fantasy where the invisible becomes unstoppable, where the person you overlook could be the one who controls everything. That's satisfying in a way that feels politically charged without being preachy. It's a power fantasy for anyone who's ever been underestimated. And it's also a commentary on how society treats those it deems small. That's why certain scenes, Yi Chen being disrespected, ignored, mocked, hit so hard, because the audience knows what he is, and the audience also knows what it feels like to be treated as disposable. The show makes you wait for the moment he finally stops taking it. And when he does, it's not just cool, it's cathartic. But here's what elevates Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya above simple catharsis: it never lets you forget the daughter is watching. That's the moral anchor. Revenge is easy when you're alone. It's complicated when a child might inherit the consequences. So the series constantly frames Yi Chen's choices through that lens. If he kills, what does she learn about conflict? If he lies, what does she learn about trust? If he disappears again, what does she learn about love? This is why the titles, Ayah Pengawalku, part matters as much as the Menguasai Segalanya, part. It's not just about dominance. It's about guardianship. And guardianship is sacrifice. Guardianship is patience. Guardianship is staying when leaving would be easier. One of the strongest cinematic choices the series makes is how it frames Yi Chen's reveals. When he's in courier mode, the camera often keeps him in the flow of the city, surrounded by movement, almost anonymous. When he shifts into master mode, the framing changes. The world seems to slow down. The camera gives him space. The sound tightens. You feel the air change. That's filmmaking language telling you, this man has been holding back, and now reality is going to adjust to him. It's a simple trick, but it works because it's consistent. And when the show finally brings the Northern Fortress lore into direct contact with Song Qingyan's corporate world, you get these fascinating culture clash moments where suits meet tradition, where money meets honor codes, where contracts meet blood oaths. Those moments could have felt ridiculous, but the series plays them straight. It treats both worlds as serious, and that seriousness is what makes the blend work. If there's a critique to make, and no series is perfect, it's that the story occasionally leans on coincidence a little too comfortably. In a plot this dense, characters run into each other at the exact moment the narrative needs it. Clues land in Yi Chen's lap when the tension needs a boost. And some side characters are drawn more as functions than as fully realized people. But when the core trio, Yi Chen, Song Qingyang, and their daughter, are in focus, those weaknesses fade. Because the emotional truth carries the machinery. And the show is very good at emotional truth. It understands the ache of time lost. It understands the bitterness of secrets. It understands the terror of letting someone close when you know your life is dangerous. It also understands the particular kind of romance that exists between two people who don't get to be human in public, who have to be symbols instead, Yi Chen a ghost, Song Qingyang a CEO queen, and who find humanity only in the presence of each other and their child. When the story hits its most intense stretch, the revenge plot and the family plot merge, and that's when the series becomes hard to stop watching. You get episodes where Yi Chen is closing in on the truth about his mother, and each step forward triggers a step backward in his personal life. Song Qingyang, meanwhile, is dealing with threats that escalate from corporate sabotage to something darker, something that suggests her life is being manipulated by forces that don't care about legality. The daughter becomes both target and key. And Yi Chen is pushed into a position where his two identities can no longer coexist. He can't be a hidden master and a present father without the worlds colliding. So the collision happens. And without spoiling the exact shape of that collision, I'll say this: the series delivers on the promise of its title. There are moments where Yi Chen's mastery is not just told, it's felt. He walks into situations that would crush ordinary people, and the atmosphere changes. People who thought they were untouchable suddenly realize they've been living in a fragile illusion. And it's thrilling. But the series also makes those moments emotionally expensive. Because every time Yi Chen dominates everything, he risks becoming the kind of man his daughter will fear rather than love. That's the knife edge. That's the tension that keeps the story from becoming empty spectacle. Audience reaction to the later reveals was huge because the show understands how to stage a reveal as an emotional event rather than a trivia fact. When Yi Chen's identity comes out, it doesn't just shock the characters, it breaks certain relationships and rebuilds them. Song Qingyin's reaction is especially important because it's not one note. It's not just awe. It's anger. It's betrayal. It's disbelief. It's fear. And underneath all of it, there's something almost primal, relief that the man she's been leaning on is real, that her instincts weren't wrong, that the safety she felt around him wasn't an illusion. That mixture is what makes her compelling. And the daughter's reaction, in the best scenes, is heartbreaking because children don't process power the way adults do. Adults see power and think of status. Children see power and think of safety. So when she looks at Yi Chen, she's not thinking, Master of the Blue Dragon. She's thinking, is this my dad, and will he stay? That's why this series can make you tear up in the middle of a revenge arc. It keeps returning to the simplest question, will he stay? In terms of cultural impact, Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya also tapped into the ongoing popularity of hidden identity narratives, but with a twist that felt fresh in 2026. It tied that identity to fatherhood rather than just romance or ambition. The fantasy isn't only, I'm secretly powerful. The fantasy is, someone powerful chooses to protect me, and even more specifically, a father chooses to protect his child. That's why so many clips that went viral weren't just fight scenes, they were protective scenes. Yi Chen standing between his daughter and danger. Yi Chen quietly fixing something for her without being asked. Yi Chen listening to her talk with the seriousness of a man who has listened to war councils. Sometimes pushing away, and trying to figure out what family even means in a world where people leave without saying goodbye and secrets hang in the air like humidity. The question of fatherhood in particular is handled with a surprising amount of nuance. Early on, there's this recurring bit where Yi asks random adults in her life to define what a father is, almost like she's doing a school project. But really she's trying to fill in the blank space in her own story, and every answer is slightly different. Her teacher says, a father is someone who works hard to give you a better life. The janitor at her school says, a father is someone who comes to your performances even when he's tired. Her best friend says, my dad gives me his phone to play games, and when she finally corners Yi Chen with the same question, he freezes like she just pointed a gun at him and says, after a too long pause, a father is someone who stands between you and danger, no matter what, and that answer tells you everything about where he's starting from. Protection, to him, is the whole job, maybe the only job, and over the course of the series he's forced to learn that protection without presence, without honesty, without vulnerability, is just another kind of control. On the plot level, the show gradually unspools the mystery of Yi Chen's mother's death and its connection to Song Group, and this is where the story could have easily drowned in exposition, but it mostly avoids that by tying each revelation to a character's emotional journey. We find out, piece by piece, that Yi Chen's mother, who in the fortress was seen as this soft, almost out-of-place presence, was actually incredibly brave in her own quiet way. She discovered that Noga Bairu was being contracted not just for stabilization missions but for outright illegal eliminations that benefited certain businessmen and politicians. And one of those businessmen was a rising star named Song Jianhua, Qingyin's father. Disgusted, she tried to leak evidence, using a contact in Song Group's legal team, hoping that a man with that much power would have the conscience to pull away from the darkness. Instead, a deal was cut in smoky back rooms, the fortress kept its contracts, and she was silenced in what was made to look like collateral damage from a rival clan's attack. When Yi Chen learns that name, Song, his first reaction is pure, white-hot rage, and he immediately wants to paint Qingyang with the same brush, to see her as an enemy, another spoiled heir benefiting from his mother's blood, and in a lesser show that might have been the whole conflict, he's torn between love and revenge, will he kill her or kiss her, that kind of thing, but Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya actually lets him sit with the complexity of it. He digs deeper. He finds out that Qingyang herself was a teenager when this all went down, that she idolized her father and had no idea what deals he was making behind closed doors, and that after he died she inherited not only his company but the blame and the enemies that came with it. That realization becomes a crucial pivot for Yi Chen's character, because it forces him to separate systemic guilt from personal guilt, to recognize that hurting her or tearing down her world won't bring his mother back and may actually repeat the very cycle of collateral damage that killed her. At the same time, Qingyang is going through her own version of this revelation, discovering that her father, the man she spent years trying to live up to, wasn't the spotless hero she imagined. The scenes of her reading old files, listening to hidden recordings, putting together that her family wealth is tangled up with places like Nogabiru, are devastating, and the actress sells that shattering of illusion so well. You see her shoulders droop for a moment, the mask slip, and there's this heartbreaking line where she looks at a photo of her dad and says, "You told me to be strong, but you never told me what you did to stay in power." And in that line you can feel generations of compromise and denial bubbling up. One of the smartest decisions the script makes is tying these revelations back to Yin, because for both Yi Chen and Qingyang, the question becomes, what kind of legacy are we passing down? Are we going to hand her the same poison chalice our parents handed us, or are we going to break this pattern? Even if it costs us everything we thought mattered, it's that question that finally pushes Yi Chen to reveal his true identity, not just as a bodyguard, not just as a fortress master, but as Yin father. And the show doesn't take the easy route of having him dramatically claim her in front of a crowd or in some tearful hospital scene. Instead it builds toward it with a series of smaller, almost clumsy attempts at honesty. There's an episode where he tries to tell Qingyang the truth first, late at night in the office, after she's just shut down a hostile takeover. With sheer cunning, and he starts, "There's something I need to say about the past, about that hotel, about your daughter," and you can see he's ready to finally lay it all bare. But a crisis call comes in, Yin is in trouble, and the moment is ripped away, which is so true to life. The universe never seems to give you the perfect time to say the thing you most need to say. Instead, the truth ends up coming out in a messy, painful way. And this is one of the most powerful sequences in the series. Yin, having overheard a fragment of adult conversation, puts together that Yi Chen is not just Uncle Yi, but her biological father, and that both adults conspired, in her eyes, to keep this from her. She confronts them not with a scream but with this icy, shaken calm that every parent dreads. She looks from one to the other and asks, "Did you ever think about what I wanted?" And that question slices right through all their justifications, protecting her, not wanting to confuse her, needing to be sure. All of those reasons suddenly feel very small next to the simple fact of her hurt. She storms off, and the camera lingers on the two adults left in the wreckage of their choices. Yi Chen torn between chasing after her and respecting her need for space, Qingyang caught between rage at him for lying and guilt over her own decisions, and for a few episodes we live in that fallout. This is where the performances really do a lot of heavy lifting, because it would have been so easy for the show to rush through this conflict, throw in a big gesture and some tears and voila, reconciliation, but instead it forces everyone to sit in the discomfort. We see Yin stop calling Yi Chen uncle, and start calling him nothing at all, just glaring when he tries to talk to her, shutting her bedroom door in his face, lashing out at school, and we see him struggling with the knowledge that this is a pain he can't punch his way out of. There's no enemy to beat up to fix this, the only way through is time and honesty and consistency, three things that are a lot scarier to a man like him than a room full of armed enemies. At the same time, external pressures are cranking up, the enemies of Song Group and Nogabiru sensing weakness, and that's one of the big thematic knots of the show. When your personal life is in shambles, the world doesn't pause to let you heal, the threats keep coming, the bills keep needing to be paid. And then gradually reveals that what it really wants to talk about is something a lot more fragile and terrifying. How do you become a good father when your whole life has trained you to be nothing but a weapon? How do you protect the people you love without controlling them? How do you open your hands when all you've ever known is how to clench your fists? And as we walk through this show together, I want you to imagine not just the fists and the fights, but the silences, the way a grown man stands one step outside the light spilling from a doorway just so he can watch his daughter laugh for 10 seconds without anyone realizing he's there, because that's the image that sums this series up for me more than any slow-motion punch ever could. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments, because this is one of those dramas that feels so steeped in Asian family culture and yet the emotions are so universal that I'm really curious how it's landing with you, whether you're watching from Jakarta, Manila, New York, Nairobi, or somewhere in between. And if you're like me, by the time you get to the middle of the season you're going to want someone to yell at, cry with, and high-five about how crazy some of these episodes get. So let's rewind for a second and set the scene, because Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya dropped in 2026 into a landscape that was already saturated with overpowered male lead urban fantasies. You know the type: former mercenary or secret bodyguard, impossibly strong, undercover in the city, falls in love with a CEO, beats up gangsters, lectures arrogant rich kids, that whole formula, and on paper this show fits that mold almost too perfectly. You've got Yi Chen, who on the surface is just a scuffed-up courier dodging rain puddles and traffic jams, one helmet among thousands, but underneath that cheap uniform he's actually the hidden master of Naga Bairu Benteng Utara, the Blue Dragon Northern Fortress, this semi-mythical martial organization that sounds like a cross between a military unit, a brotherhood, and a cult, and he's abandoned that throne, vanished into the crowds, because his mother has been killed under mysterious circumstances that spiral outward into corporate conspiracies, political power plays, and old fortress secrets. On the other side of the city you have Song Qingyang. She's not just any CEO, she's the woman holding an entire empire. Together with sheer willpower and a sharp mind, inheriting her father's conglomerate in a world where everyone around her, from board members to competitors to so-called allies, is waiting for her to stumble, calling her Little Song behind her back while they plan to carve up her legacy. And in the middle of those two lives, like the quiet gravity that none of them can escape, there is a girl, their daughter, who doesn't even know the full truth of where she came from. She only knows that her mom works too late, that the world around her feels a little bit dangerous, and that the new uncle who walks her home and stands outside her classroom door makes her feel weirdly safe, like he could move mountains if he wanted to. The show could have started loud, it could have opened with a big fight in the snow at the fortress, or a high-speed chase through the city, but instead it gives us something much more telling. The first image we get of Yi Chen in the present day is him in the rain, stalled at a red light, surrounded by other delivery riders, his visor fogged, water dripping down the back of his neck, and he's just waiting, anonymous, ordinary. And then a car screams through the intersection, running the light, almost slamming into a kid who's stepped off the curb, and in that split second the mask drops, the hidden master snaps to the surface. The way the camera moves tells you everything you need to know about him before anyone says a word, a slow dolly into his eyes as they sharpen, his hand loosening from the handlebar like he's shedding 10 kilos of weight. And then time seems to slow just a fraction as he kicks the scooter down, slides across wet asphalt, scoops the kid out of the way, lets the car graze his sleeve instead of the boy's skull. It's over in 2 seconds. The kid is crying, the driver is cursing, the other riders are gawking, and Yi Chen just brushes water off his uniform, checks that the package is okay, and gets back on his bike, mumbling, "Sorry, I'm late," like what he just did wasn't objectively insane. And that's the tone I love right off the bat. The way the show uses small, grounded heroics before it escalates to wild fortress-level fights. Then we cut to the top floors of a glass tower where Song Qingyang is being introduced in a boardroom bathed in cool light. And unlike Yi Chen, everything about her entrance screams control: crisp white shirt, high-waisted slacks, the minimalist watch, hair pulled back in the kind of low ponytail that only works if you've perfected your posture over years of being underestimated, and she's laying into a group of executives who have been quietly sabotaging a division to make her look bad, dismantling their arguments with receipts, footnotes, and calm, surgical precision. And yet the camera betrays that it's not as effortless as she makes it look. You see her fingers tightening on the edge of the conference table when someone mentions her father's name. You see the flicker of hurt when an older director sighs, "If Chairman Song were still alive," as if to say, "You'll never be him." And behind all of that you can almost hear the clock ticking, counting down to when these two lives, rain-soaked courier and glass tower CEO, are about to collide. What I appreciate is how the show takes its time with that collision. It doesn't rush to throw Yi Chen and Qingyang into each other's arms or into some contrived contract marriage in episode 1, instead it creates this universe of near misses and half memories, because the truth is they've met before, in the past, in a different city, at a different emotional temperature, when both of them were broken in ways they didn't want to admit, through flashbacks that are lit warmer, slightly grainy, like a memory caught on a cheaper lens. We see a younger, more hopeful Yi Chen on his first mission outside the fortress, escorting a whistleblower, and we see a less hardened Qing Yang, still just the daughter of a rich man, wandering through that hotel bar after a devastating argument with her father about the direction of the company, her eyes red but her chin up out of sheer stubbornness. The way they meet is wonderfully mundane. There's a spilled drink, an apology, a half smile, and then hours of talking where they don't exchange last names. They just share this strange, fleeting intimacy, two strangers in a city that isn't home for either of them. And it all ends in a night that both of them will carry like a scar and a secret. When Yi Chen wakes up the next morning, his phone is full of fortress orders. His handler is blowing him up, telling him that something has gone terribly wrong with the operation, that his mother's cover might be blown, and he leaves that hotel room like a man fleeing a dream, never turning back, his focus narrowing into a single point: get back north, find mom, fix this. The cruel punchline is that by the time he gets there, she's already dead. The fortress already whispering about betrayal and necessary sacrifices, and everything that might have grown from that one night with Qing Yang is buried under snow, rage, and blood. Years later, he's in the city as a courier, tracing faint threads of information that lead back to a major conglomerate, Song Group, and the show doesn't spell it out immediately. But you start to realize along with him that his personal grief and this massive corporate machine are intertwined in ways neither of them fully understand. So when the company quietly hires extra security after a series of accidents surrounding key executives, and a freelancer with suspiciously elite skills named Yi shows up on our shortlist, it's not fate exactly, but it is the inevitable intersection of two people who've been trying very hard not to think about each other. The first time Yi Chen and Qing Yang meet in the present, the show refuses to give us a dramatic recognition moment. Instead it plays with the idea that neither of them really remembers the other's face clearly, because trauma tends to blur things. She remembers a warm voice and gentle hands from that night. He remembers the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of someone laughing in the dark. So when they see each other again across a polished office table, they both flinch for a heartbeat. You can see it in their eyes, but their brains rush in with plausible deniability. No, it can't be. There are millions of people in this city. Don't be ridiculous. And so they file away that flutter as adrenaline, attraction, annoyance, anything but recognition. They size each other up instead as strangers. She sees a man whose resume doesn't quite match his reflexes, whose posture screams soldier even when he's trying to shrink into the background, and he sees a woman whose controlled demeanor barely conceals a lifetime's worth of loneliness. He gets hired as part of her personal security detail, officially as a driver and bodyguard, unofficially as a human shield against threats she doesn't fully understand, and right away we're introduced to the third point of this triangle, Song In-yor, their daughter. Now, child characters in this genre can be a coin toss. They are either painfully precocious or unbearably whiny, but In-yor walks that fine line where she's absolutely a kid. You see her sulk, slam doors, stubbornly do the opposite of what she's told, and yet she's also old enough to sense that the adults in her life are hiding things from her, and that awareness gives her a melancholy edge that cuts through the cuteness. The first time she meets Yi Chen, she's sitting on the curb outside her school, backpack on the ground, drawing on the pavement with a piece of chalk, because her mom is late again and the family driver she knows didn't show up, and this new guy in a uniform that doesn't match the black sedan steps up and says her name in this careful, respectful tone, Song In-yor. And she immediately narrows her eyes and goes, stranger danger. My teacher says don't talk to strangers, and he has this half-second where his legendary Noga Byaru composure cracks and he just blinks, because he's infiltrated fortresses, outsmarted assassins, survived torture, but he did not come prepared for a 7-year-old with pigtails and attitude. It's only when her mom calls, yelling over speakerphone that this is the new uncle who's going to bring her home, that she begrudgingly picks up her bag, still clearly evaluating him with the kind of suspicion you usually only see from veteran interrogators. And that first drive home is such an underrated scene. No action, no tension on the surface, just Yi Chen at the wheel of a luxury car he's not used to, trying not to check the mirrors too obviously, and in the back seat, In-yor talking non-stop because silence makes her uneasy. She asks him why he has scars on his hands, why his knuckles look like he punches walls for fun, why his eyes look like he's always thinking about something far away, and his answers are awkward, half jokes, half dodges, and somewhere in there, with no one else around, she hits him with, "Do you have a dad?" And the question lands like a blow, because of course he did, and the fortress took even his right to grieve that properly. But he just swallows and says, "I had a mom who was very strong," and you can feel how much of himself he's not saying. That's one of the biggest strengths of the show, it understands when to shut up, when to let silence do the heavy lifting, and director-wise, those small choices add up. Now, in terms of structure, the show is a blend of family melodrama, martial arts thriller, and corporate espionage, and if that sounds like a lot of genres in one pot, it absolutely is, but surprisingly it mostly works because the writers keep circling back to emotion as the glue. We get a case of the week feel for the first few episodes where different threats come at the Song family from different angles: suspicious car crashes, cyber attacks on their data, creepy notes left in Inuo's locker, and each incident is both a plot engine and a way to force our characters into new emotional configurations. Yi Chen and Qing Yang arguing over how much danger to expose Inuo to, Qing Yang confronting her own father's legacy, Yi Chen realizing that the corporate world he always dismissed as soft is just another battlefield with different weapons. Visually, the cinematography leans into contrasts. The fortress flashbacks are all snow and stone, long static shots, desaturated palettes with splashes of Nogabayaru blue, while the city is neon and chrome, handheld cameras weaving through crowds, reflections in glass catching Yi Chen's face in fragments, like a man who's still not fully here. The Blue Dragon Northern Fortress itself, as we see more of it over time, feels almost like a character in its own right. This looming presence in the background of Yi Chen's life, it's perched on a cliffside, half fortress, half monastery, flags whipping in a wind that sounds like a constant low growl, and inside its walls we see tiny vignettes of Yi Chen's past, boys lined up in the snow, hands bleeding as they punch wooden posts, his mother moving among them with a kettle of hot tea, sneaking extra food to the ones who look like they're about to collapse, the fortress master watching from above with an unreadable gaze. Every time Yi Chen taps into his Nogabayaru training in the modern day, the editing gives us a half-second cut to something from that fortress, as if his body is remembering before his mind catches up, and that creates this tension between who he was trained to be and who he's struggling to become. On the corporate side, Song Group is rendered with an almost sterile beauty, the color grading leaning into glassy whites and cool grays, except when Inuo is present, in which case tiny warm colors creep into the frame, a yellow backpack, a red hairpin, kids' drawings taped to the edge of a cold steel desk, and those details keep reminding you, even when the show is knee-deep in mergers and stock manipulations, that all of this matters most because it's shaping this one child's world, and that's really where the heart of the series lies for me. It's not just about Yi Chen discovering he has a daughter or Qing Yang learning to trust someone after being alone at the top for so long. It's about Inuo watching these two deeply damaged adults circle each other, sometimes colliding. The enemies keep plotting. There's a brutal irony in watching Yi Chen at his lowest emotional point also being called upon to be at his sharpest physically, defending Inuo and Qing Yang from people who would gladly use their fractured relationship as leverage. The action scenes in this stretch of the series are some of the best choreographed, not just in terms of punches and kicks, but in how they reflect the characters' mental states. There's one sequence in a parking garage where Yi Chen is ambushed by a squad of mercenaries sent by a powerful politician with fortress ties, and the fight that unfolds is grim, efficient, without flair. Earlier in the show his fights had a kind of graceful, almost playful edge, like a man who knew he was superior and could afford the luxury of style. But here he's off balance, his focus blurred by worry over Inuo, and the choreography becomes uglier, more desperate, more about survival than dominance. He walks away victorious, of course, because his skill level is still off the charts, but he's blooded, limping, breathing hard, and instead of celebrating the win, he leans against a concrete pillar and whispers, "What am I doing?" like he's finally starting to question not whether he can fight, but whether he should keep fighting this way. It's around this point that the fortress itself makes its strongest move to reclaim him. The elders of Nogabayaru have been watching from afar, tracking his activities, maybe even orchestrating some of the chaos to test him, and they send one of his old comrades, a woman named Lin Shui, to bring him back into the fold. Lin Shui is a fantastic character because she's not a simple antagonist or a jealous ex. She's someone who genuinely loves Yi Chen in her own fierce, fortress-shaped way, someone who believes he belongs on that cliffside training the next generation, not playing house in the city. And their reunion is charged with years of shared history. She reminds him of their oath of They're fallen brothers, of his mother's dying wish as she understood it, and she scoffs at the idea that he can just walk away from all of that to be a chauffeur and a half-forgotten father. Their fight, because of course it leads to a sparring session that's half duel, half conversation, is one of the most beautifully staged in the series, a dance of familiarity where every move has a memory attached, and through it, we see the core of Yi Chen's transformation. In the past he would have met her strike for strike, proving his superiority, but now his movements are more about deflection and avoidance. He's trying not to hurt her, trying to knock her out of this mission without breaking their bond completely, and that reluctant restraint drives her absolutely insane. Thematically, this is where the show interrogates what loyalty means, whether staying true to your brothers in arms requires you to stay on the battlefield forever, or whether there's another way to honor what you've been through, by building something softer that your scars can still live inside. While all of this fortress drama is unfolding, Qingyang is waging her own war in boardrooms and courtrooms, and the show does a good job of not sidelining her into just being the love interest, or the mother. She's uncovering layers of rot in her company, facing down men who have been in positions of power since before she was born, and the camera often frames her the same way it does Yi Chen in fights, alone against a wall of opponents, surrounded but still standing. It's in one of these confrontations that she delivers a line that I think encapsulates her arc. She's being cornered into signing a deal that would save the company short-term but tie them forever to corrupt backers, and one of the directors says, "You're too emotional, you're letting your personal morality get in the way of business," and she looks him dead in the eye and says, "If my father's morality had gotten in the way of business little sooner, maybe some people would still be alive," and in that moment you can practically feel Yi Chen's mother's ghost nodding somewhere off-screen. Eventually, all these threads, fortress politics, corporate corruption, fractured family, converge into a final arc where everything is on the line at once. Liang Zifan, the rival executive whose deals are tied to Noga Bairu, sees that Yi Chen and Qingyang are starting to coordinate, that evidence is being gathered that could blow the roof off years of collusion, and he makes the one move guaranteed to bring every latent instinct in Yi Chen roaring back. He targets Inuo directly. The kidnapping sequence that follows is a masterclass in tension, not because it's full of flashy stunts, but because the show has spent so long making Inuo feel like a real person that the idea of her in danger hits you in the gut. We watch as she's lured away after school by someone she trusts, a teacher being blackmailed, doing the wrong thing out of desperation, and shoved into a van, and the camera stays with her in that claustrophobic darkness, the sound design amplifying her shaky breathing, the muffled noise of the city outside, the quiet sob of the teacher who immediately regrets what she's done. When Yi Chen and Qingyang realize she's missing, the episode fractures into this frantic split-screen narrative of two people attacking the problem from different angles. Yi Chen tearing through the city with a map of potential drop points in his head, using old fortress logic to predict a modern criminal's moves, and Qingyang sitting in the control room, hacking into CCTV feeds, tracing calls, weaponizing the entire surveillance infrastructure of her own company. The climax of that arc, where Yi Chen finally reaches the industrial dock where Inuo is being held, is everything the show has been building toward in terms of action, emotion, and character. He walks into that warehouse not as the hidden master of Noga Bairu, not as a courier, but as a father whose child is in danger, and the way he fights is different. There's no showing off, no clever quips, just this relentless, almost animal determination to reach her, to put his body between hers and any possible harm. The choreography here gives us the big heroic moments you'd expect. Yes, he takes on multiple armed men, he uses the environment brilliantly, swinging on chains, ducking behind crates, turning a metal pipe into an extension of his will, but the shots that stick with you are the ones of his face every time he hears Inuo cry out, the micro-hesitations when he has to choose between chasing an escaping guard and checking if she's okay, when he finally cuts through the last layer of defense and unties her. She clings to him with this ferocity that breaks whatever distance she's been trying to maintain, her fingernails digging into his neck as she buries her face in his shoulder, and she doesn't call him uncle, or Mr., or anything at all. She just sobs, "I knew you would come," over and over, like a mantra, and he says, voice cracking, "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner, I'm sorry," and in that moment, you realize that for all his talk about protection, the thing he's most afraid of is not being able to be there in time. After the dust settles from that arc, after the villains are arrested or exposed, after Noga Bairu's reign is publicly disgraced through a combination of leaked documents and outraged media coverage. Those moments made people emotional because they touch a universal wound, the desire to feel safe. And the series complicates that desire by showing the danger that follows powerful protectors. If you want to talk about writing craft, one of the smartest decisions is how the series uses the mother's death not just as a backstory, but as a present force. Yi Chen's grief is not a flashback, it's a constant undertow. The series doesn't let him get over it quickly. It shows how grief can make you obsessive, how it can make you suspicious, how it can make you see betrayal everywhere, and how it can also make you numb to joy. That numbness is what makes his connection to Song Qingyang and the daughter feel like sunlight. He doesn't suddenly become happy. He becomes capable of warmth again, slowly, in a way that feels earned. Song Qingyang's own wounds, betrayals, loneliness, the pressure of being at the top, mirror his, creating a romance that feels less like escape and more like mutual recognition. It's two people saying, without words, I know what it is to carry a burden alone. And then the daughter enters as the person who refuses to let them carry it alone anymore. It's a classic triangle, but it's not romantic, it's familial. It's about building a unit out of broken parts. The show's emotional analysis lands best when you notice how often it frames doors and thresholds. Yi Chen is always arriving, always leaving, always at the edge of spaces. Couriers are literally threshold people. And fatherhood is a threshold too, you step into it and you can't step back. The series uses that visual language to emphasize Yi Chen's liminal existence. His between worlds. Between identities. Between vengeance and love. Song Qingyang, too, is always framed through glass, office windows, car windows, the transparent barriers of wealth that separate her from ordinary life. When Yi Chen enters her space, he doesn't just enter her office, he enters her isolation. And when she enters his world, she doesn't just meet his past, she meets the part of him he tried to bury. The show's cinematography is constantly saying, these people are separated by invisible walls, and the story is about breaking them, sometimes violently, sometimes tenderly. There's also a strong undercurrent about reputation and the stories people tell about you. Yi Chen's legend as the Blue Dragon is a story others tell, a myth that travels ahead of him. His courier identity is another story, one that makes him invisible. Song Qingyang's CEO persona is a story the media tells, the board tells, her rivals tell. The daughter, again, is the truth that cuts through narrative. She doesn't care about rumors. She cares about presence. That's why the series feels emotionally grounded even when it becomes mythic. It's always checking myth against reality. Okay, so who is this for? If you love stories where an underestimated protagonist reveals overwhelming competence, you'll eat this up. If you love corporate drama with betrayal and boardroom warfare, it's got you. If you love martial arts mythos and secret sect politics, it's got you. If you love family reunion stories that make you cry, it's got you. The surprising thing is that it doesn't feel like it's trying to please everyone by doing everything. It feels like it has a central emotional promise. This man will stop being a ghost and become a father, and everything else serves that promise. Even the revenge, at its best, serves that promise by forcing Yi Chen to decide what kind of man he will be for his child. The final act, or final stretch, depending on how you're consuming it, brings the emotional and plot threads into alignment. The truth about the mother's death comes into focus in a way that recontextualizes earlier events. The villains reveal their real faces. Alliances shift. Song Qingyang is tested in ways that force her to decide what matters more, her empire or her family, and the series refuses to let that be an easy choice because her empire is also her survival, her life's work, the things she built in a world that wanted her to fail. Yi Chen is tested in ways that force him to decide whether vengeance is justice or just pain wearing armor. And the daughter is tested in the only way children are ever tested in adult stories, by being made to endure the consequences of adult decisions. The show doesn't exploit that for cheap tears, it uses it to force transformation. When it lands hard. By the time the story reaches its emotional peaks, you realize the title has been working on you the whole time. Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya isn't just saying the father is strong. It's saying the father's choices will shape everything, his child's future, his partner's world, the balance of power around them, and even his own soul. Mastery, in this story, is not just the ability to defeat opponents. It's the ability to carry love without destroying it. And that's why, when you finish it, you're left with that strange mix of satisfaction and ache. Satisfaction because the story delivers the rush it promises, the hidden master steps forward, the corrupt tremble, the lies burn away. Ache because you've watched people lose time they can't get back, and you've watched love grow in the cracks of trauma rather than in a clean garden. That's life. That's why it works. So here's my verdict in emotional terms, the way I think this series wants to be judged. Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is a 2026 release that understands the guilty pleasure of power fantasy but refuses to leave it guilty or shallow. It dresses the fantasy in grief, in romance, in parenthood, and then asks you to take it seriously. It's not flawless, and it occasionally stretches coincidence and melodrama, but it's big-hearted, it's tense, it's stylish, and most importantly it's anchored by a core relationship that actually matters. You come for the idea of a secret dragon master courier who can dismantle anyone who gets in his way, and you stay for the quieter, braver question, can a man built for war learn to be a home? And if you've ever wanted a story where the most dangerous person in the room chooses, again and again, to use that danger to protect rather than to dominate, while still letting the darkness of revenge tempt him like a familiar friend, then this one is going to sink its claws into you and not let go, because when Yi Chen finally stands as who he is, no uniform to hide him, no silence to protect him, what you feel isn't just hype, it's release, the release of watching someone stop running from their own life, and in that final emotional echo, the series leaves you with something surprisingly tender for such a ruthless premise, the idea that the greatest victory isn't controlling everything, it's choosing who you control yourself for. There are action dramas that show you flying kicks and shattered glass and perfectly choreographed chaos, and then there are the ones that slip a knife quietly under your ribs when you're not looking, the ones where a single look from a father to his child hits harder than any punch, and Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya is absolutely that second kind of story. It's the kind of series that lures you in with its promise of an overpowered hidden master, secret martial fortresses in the north. This mythic blue dragon legend. The show enters what I like to think of as its after phase, and this is where a lot of series would start rushing toward a happily ever after, but Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya takes the time to explore what happens when the war you've been fighting for years finally ends. Yi Chen has to answer the question, if I'm not the hidden master, if I'm not an avenger, who am I? And the answer the show offers is both simple and profound. He's a man who needs to learn how to live in the daylight, one morning at a time. We see him, in the final episodes, do things that would have been unthinkable at the start of the series, standing in line at a parent-teacher conference, awkwardly holding a tray at a school fundraiser, sitting in a crowded auditorium waiting for his daughter to perform in a play about animals, fidgeting with the program because he doesn't know where to put his hands when they are not making fists. These scenes are shot with the same care and intensity as the earlier fight sequences, and that's part of what makes them so moving, the way the show treats a man learning to clap on cue and smile for photos as being just as brave as when he faced down a room full of armed opponents. Inuo's journey, too, doesn't just end with the kidnapping rescue. She still has to process what it means to have two parents who are very much alive but who made a lot of choices without her input. There's a beautifully written scene where she's sitting on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, talking through the door to Qingyang, who's on the other side, and she admits that she's scared that if she lets Yi Chen be her father, if she really opens her heart to him, he'll disappear again like the first time, when he left without even knowing she existed. Qingyang, for once, doesn't try to spin it or make promises she's not sure about, she just says, I'm scared too, and then, the difference now is that you're old enough to tell us when we're being stupid, and that little bit of humor cracks something open, allows them to connect as not just mother and daughter, but as two girls, in a way, trying to navigate adulthood together. Qingyang and Yi Chen's romance thread, which has been simmering under everything, finally gets to breathe in these closing chapters, and what I really like is that it doesn't suddenly become the main event at the expense of their growth as parents. They share quiet moments more than passionate ones, a cup of coffee on a balcony. As the city wakes up below them, paperwork scattered on the table between them as they argue about school choices instead of corporate mergers, a late-night conversation where they actually talk about that night in the hotel all those years ago and what they were running from then. They acknowledge that they are not the same people who met that night, that some of what drew them together back then was pain, loneliness, a kind of selfish need to feel anything other than numb, and that what they are building now has to be something steadier, kinder, more intentional. their chemistry is less about smoldering gazes and more about the way they start to unconsciously fall into each other's rhythms. The way Yi Chen automatically picks up the slack on mornings when Qingyang is exhausted, the way she adjusts her schedule without thinking to make sure she can be at Inuo's big moments because she knows he still finds crowds overwhelming. From a cultural standpoint, the show taps into some really resonant themes about masculinity, duty, and generational change in a Southeast Asian context without ever turning into a lecture. Through Yi Chen, we see the old model of manhood, stoic, unyielding, defined by how much physical pain you can take, how many people you can protect through sheer force, and through his arc, we watch that model get challenged by the reality that emotional cowardice can hide behind physical bravery, that it's entirely possible to be the strongest man in the room and still be too afraid to say, "I need help," or, "I'm sorry." Through Qingyang, we see the burden placed on daughters in powerful families, expected to be both ruthless and nurturing, to uphold the legacy while cleaning up its messes, and through Inuo, we see a generation that is less willing to accept, "That's just how it is," as an excuse, a girl who questions everything and everyone, including the people she loves most. In terms of audience reaction, you can almost feel the fandom this show would generate, with people latching onto different aspects depending on where they are in their own lives. People who grew up with absent fathers or complicated parental relationships might see themselves in Inuo's hesitant trust, in the way she both craves and resents Yi Chen's presence. Single parents might see themselves in Qingyang's exhausted determination, in her oscillation between ultra-competence and private collapse. And anyone who's ever tried to walk away from a toxic family of any kind, be it a workplace, a friend group, or, yes, a pseudo-military fortress on a mountain, will probably feel a sharp pang watching Yi Chen try to define himself outside of that identity. Stylistically, the show isn't perfect. There are definitely moments where the pacing wobbles, where a subplot with secondary characters drags an episode down, or where the music swells a little too obviously, telling you how to feel. But overall, the scenes show a lot less than in many dramas of this type. And that's largely because the emotional core stays consistent. Every flashy set piece, every melodramatic twist is ultimately in service of exploring these central questions. Can a man built for war learn to live in peace? Can a woman raised in privilege accept the flaws of her inheritance without being consumed by guilt? Can a child born into a web of lies carve out a truth for herself that isn't defined solely by other people's sins? When the final episode fades out, we don't get a perfect conclusion, and I'm glad we don't. There's no scene where Yi Chen officially takes over Noga Byaru to reform it from within, no fairy tale moment where every villain goes to jail for exactly the right amount of time, no magical erasure of trauma. Instead, we get images that feel more like beginnings than endings. Yi Chen teaching Inuo how to throw a punch properly but emphasizing, over and over, this is only for when there's no other choice. Qingyang sitting in a boardroom full of younger faces, having finally cleared out the worst of the dead weight, talking about transparency and social responsibility with a conviction that feels earned, not just buzzwords. Inuo standing between them at a crosswalk, taking each of their hands on her own initiative, not because she's forced to, but because, after everything, she wants to. And as the light turns green and they step off the curb together, we get one last echo of that very first scene. The one where Yi Chen stopped his scooter in the rain to pull a child out of harm's way, except this time he's not lunging alone into danger. Is walking forward with his family, and that, more than any declaration of power or title, makes the title Ayah Pengawalku Menguasai Segalanya feel almost like a joke he's finally in on, because he doesn't need to control everything anymore, he just needs to show up, day after day, imperfect but present. And in a world as chaotic and unforgiving as the one this series paints, maybe that's the bravest thing any of us can do.